They called her the queen of screwball comedy, a woman whose laughter could light up a room and whose wit made Hollywood's golden age sparkle. But on a cold January night in 1942, Carole Lombard, the brightest star in America, boarded a plane that would never land. She had just finished a war bond rally in Indiana. The nation adored her. Her husband, Gable, worshipped her, and her career was soaring higher than ever. That night, she was supposed to take the train home to Los Angeles. But Carole was impatient. She wanted to surprise Gable. So, against advice, she took Flight 3. Hours later, witnesses in the Nevada desert saw a streak of fire crossing the sky, a comet falling from heaven. The crash that followed shattered more than rock. It broke Hollywood's heart. Gable, the king, would never be the same again. The government called it an accident. The studio called it a tragedy. But some say there was more to that night, a radio message, a strange flight path, and questions that have never been answered. Carole Lombard was 33. Too bright, too brave, too alive to disappear quietly. They said she lived like lightning and died the same way. But the truth behind that final flight is much darker. Before she became the dazzling spirit of Hollywood, Carole Lombard was just Jane Alice Peters, a wild, mischievous girl from Fort Wayne, Indiana, born in 1908. Even as a child, she stood out. She wasn't quiet, delicate, or obedient like other girls. She climbed trees in her Sunday dress, raced the neighborhood boys, and once broke her nose playing baseball, a scar she'd spend years learning to hide under the perfect studio lighting. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother moved the family to Los Angeles, chasing stability and a new start. That move would change everything. At 12, a film director spotted Carole playing baseball on the street and offered her a small role in a silent film. She didn't think much of it then. She just liked the chaos, the attention, the noise. But by her late teens, she was signed by Fox Films, transformed into Carole Lombard, a name that rolled off the tongue like champagne. The studios tried to mold her into the classic leading lady, graceful, soft, and romantic. But Carole wasn't made for that kind of acting. She was too quick, too real, too alive. It wasn't until the rise of sound pictures that she found her true calling: comedy. Her sharp timing, whip-smart delivery, and total lack of vanity made her unlike anyone else on screen. In an industry obsessed with perfection, Carole embraced imperfection. She would trip, swear, laugh too loud, and steal every scene without trying. By the early 1930 seconds, she had become the queen of screwball comedy. Films like 20th Century, 1934, My Man Godfrey, 1936, and Nothing Sacred, 1937, made her America's favorite woman, charming, chaotic, and unstoppable. Off camera, she was exactly the same, a woman of mischief and heart. She threw loud parties, cursed like a sailor, and refused to play the part of the delicate Hollywood doll. Her humor could disarm anyone, even the most cynical director. And then came Gable, the king of Hollywood, the man every woman wanted, and the only one Carole refused to take seriously at first. They met while filming No Man of Her Own in 1932, but it wasn't until years later that their romance exploded: wild, passionate, unpretentious. Together, they were America's royal couple, the king and the comet. Gable called her his best pal. She called him Ma. They hunted together, laughed until dawn, and kept their life far from the cameras. But underneath that laughter, Carole had a fierce sense of purpose. When World War II broke out, she became one of Hollywood's loudest voices for patriotism, raising millions in war bonds, pushing studios to support the troops, and proving that even Hollywood royalty could serve something greater than fame. By 1942, she had it all: love, fame, purpose. And that's what made her death so incomprehensible. Because when the plane went down, it wasn't just an actress who died, it was America's laughter. By the late 1930 seconds, Carole Lombard was untouchable. She had become the highest-paid actress in Hollywood, a rare woman who controlled her career, her image, and her life. Unlike most studio stars, she picked her own scripts, negotiated her own contracts, and spoke to producers as an equal, not a decoration. She wasn't just funny, she was fearless. Directors called her One-Take Lombard because she threw herself into every scene, bruises and all. She swore like a soldier, laughed like a child, and never let anyone tell her what a lady should or shouldn't do. She once told a reporter, "I'm not a lady, I'm an actress." Hollywood adored her because she made it all look effortless: the comedy, the glamour, the chaos. But privately, she wanted more than fame. She wanted something real. She found it in Clark Gable. They had danced around each other for years, both married, both pretending not to care until fate finally caught up. When Gable's marriage ended, Carole didn't wait for a ring. She simply walked into his life and never left. In 1939, they married quietly on a ranch in Kingman, Arizona. It was simple, un-Hollywood, and entirely theirs. Their home in Encino became a refuge from fame filled with dogs, friends, and laughter. They called each other nicknames, Ma and Pa. He hunted, she gardened. They drank whiskey on the porch and talked about growing old together. But Carole was restless. When the United States entered World War II, she threw herself into service, hosting rallies, donating her jewelry, and convincing the government to use Hollywood's voice to sell war bonds. She became more than a movie star. She became a symbol of patriotism. In January 1942, she embarked on a cross-country tour to raise money for the war. She was exhausted but unstoppable. In just 1 week, she sold over $2 million in war bonds, more than any celebrity before her. The final rally, held in her home state of Indiana, ended with thunderous applause and a promise. "Buy bonds, let's bring our boys home." That night, she was supposed to return to Los Angeles by train. The government had advised it. Her mother and her press agent were traveling with her. But Carole hated waiting. She wanted to get home to Gable. So she flipped a coin. If it landed tails, they'd take the train. If it landed heads, they'd fly. It landed heads. At 4 a.m., on the 16th of January 1942, Transcontinental and Western Air Flight 3 took off from Las Vegas, carrying 22 passengers, Carole, her mother, her press agent, and a group of soldiers. Moments later, the plane veered off course and slammed into Mount Potosi, a black wall of rock rising out of the Nevada desert. The explosion was so bright that ranchers miles away saw the flash. There were no survivors. Hollywood woke up to the news in disbelief. Clark Gable fainted when he heard. He rushed to Nevada, climbed the mountain himself, and helped search through the wreckage. They found her wedding ring still shining amid the ash. The woman who lived like lightning had left the world the same way, sudden, blinding, unforgettable. The government called it pilot error. But even now, questions remain. Why was the plane off its route? Why did the radio go silent minutes before impact? And why did military couriers board that same flight, carrying classified documents? To this day, the crash of Flight 3 remains one of Hollywood's great mysteries. The night America's brightest star fell from the sky. When the sun rose over the Nevada desert that morning, there was no laughter left in Hollywood. The newspapers called it the tragedy that stopped the nation. 22 lives lost. And among them, Carole Lombard, the brightest, most beloved woman on the silver screen. Clark Gable arrived at the crash site before anyone else. He was pale, silent, unrecognizable. He refused to stay behind the police lines. He climbed the mountain himself through smoke, through twisted metal, searching for anything that might have been hers. When he found her hairbrush, her shoe, and finally her wedding ring, he collapsed. The king of Hollywood was broken. They brought her body down the next day. Even then, Gable wouldn't leave her side. He signed the papers, arranged the funeral, and buried her in Forest Lawn Memorial Park, in a simple casket, no glamour, no gold, just love. But behind the quiet grief, questions started to rise. The government said the crash was caused by pilot error, a navigation mistake that sent the plane 30 miles off course, but others weren't convinced. Some locals reported hearing explosions before the impact. Military officials confirmed that 4 Army couriers were on board, carrying classified defense materials, and some claimed that Lombard's plane was rerouted at the last minute for reasons no one could explain. To this day, no official explanation satisfies everyone. Was it a tragic mistake? Or was something darker at play, a wartime secret buried beneath the flames? For Clark Gable, it didn't matter. The world had moved on. He couldn't. He joined the Army Air Forces within weeks of her death, insisting on flying combat missions over Europe. His friends said he wanted to die, that he was chasing the sky that had taken her. He returned home years later, but he was never the same. The laughter that had once filled their home in Encino was gone. Gable kept her photo beside his bed for the rest of his life. When people asked him about her, he would just nod, light a cigarette, and change the subject. And when he died in 1960, he was buried beside her, as he had always asked. Carole Lombard's death wasn't just the end of a love story. It was the end of an era. America lost its brightest star, and Hollywood lost its innocence. She was 33, full of purpose, full of joy. A woman whose life proved that stardom didn't have to mean surrender. and whose death proved that even the greatest lights can fall without warning. Her story is tragedy wrapped in brilliance, a life that burned so fast, the world is still glowing from it. From this channel's perspective, Carole Lombard was more than a movie star. She was the heartbeat of a generation that needed to believe in light. She wasn't just funny, she was fearless. And that's what made her loss feel like the world had gone dim. Lombard represented a kind of Hollywood that doesn't exist anymore, honest, quick-witted, unfiltered. She didn't hide behind image consultants or publicists. She was who she was, on and off camera. When she cursed, people laughed. When she cried, they believed her. In an age of polished glamour, she made imperfection feel divine. She was also one of the few stars who understood that fame came with responsibility. During the war, she didn't just write checks or pose for propaganda photos. She stood on stages, shaking hands, making jokes, working crowds for hours, pushing America to care. It wasn't performance, it was conviction. That's what makes her story so haunting, because her death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was symbolic. It marked the moment when the golden dream of Hollywood met the hard reality of the world beyond the screen. Her husband, Gable, never recovered. The man once known for his swagger and charm became withdrawn, distant, quieter. He carried her ghost with him to the end. In a way, their story is the American fairy tale turned inside out, the king and queen of Hollywood, brought down not by scandal, not by time, but by fate itself. Carole's legacy, though, never faded. Every actress who's ever dared to be bold, loud, or funny owes something to her. Lucille Ball once said, "Carole taught me that comedy was courage, not clowning." And that might be the purest truth about her, that her laughter wasn't escape, it was armor. She lived life with her heart unguarded, and the world loved her for it. Carole Lombard burned brighter than almost anyone before or after her. Her life reminds us that beauty doesn't last, but spirit does. Even now, when we see her face on old posters, it doesn't feel like nostalgia. It feels like electricity alive, unpredictable, unstoppable. She was the comet that fell from the sky. But for a moment, she lit up the whole world. There's an old film reel, grainy, flickering, the sound of laughter echoing between frames. Carole Lombard walks into the scene, eyes alive, voice sharp, smile unstoppable. And for a moment, the world feels lighter. Even now, watching her feels like catching sunlight in your hands, bright, brief, impossible to hold. She was energy personified. She didn't just act, she radiated. They called her the Queen of Comedy, but her real gift was something deeper, the ability to remind people that joy itself could be brave. She made laughter feel like resistance. And when war came, she turned that laughter into purpose. Her story ended in fire, a plane crash in the desert, a nation in mourning, a husband who never smiled the same again. But that isn't how she should be remembered. Because Carole Lombard didn't belong to tragedy. She belonged to life. Every time you see her on screen tossing a line, rolling her eyes, breaking every rule, she's still alive in that frame. She's still the girl from Indiana who refused to slow down, the woman who loved recklessly, and the soul who gave everything she had to a world that couldn't protect her. Gable once said, "You never forget her, you just learn to live with the missing." And that's what she became, the beautiful absence that lingered long after the laughter stopped. Carole Lombard's flame didn't go out in 1942. It simply rose higher beyond fame, beyond grief, into legend. Some stars fade, some fall, but the rarest ones, they burn forever. She was one of them, the comet that fell from the sky. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, you know,